The thundering sound of hooves was the only warning Violet Morrison had before the stagecoach disappeared over the horizon, leaving her alone on the dusty trail with nothing but a wailing infant and the cruel Dakota Territory sun beating down on her. She clutched the bundle to her chest, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face as she watched her last hope vanish into the distance. The baby, not even hers, had been thrust into her arms by a dying woman just hours ago, and now she was stranded on the railroad tracks that cut through the unforgiving landscape like a scar. The year was 1875, and Violet had never felt more abandoned in her 23 years of life. "Hush now, little one," she whispered, though her voice cracked with exhaustion. Her water canteen was nearly empty, and the nearest town, Pueblo, Colorado, was still miles away according to the last milestone she'd passed. The baby's cries grew more insistent, echoing across the empty plains as if calling out for anyone to help them. As if in answer to an unspoken prayer, a plume of dust appeared on the horizon. Violet squinted against the harsh sunlight, clutching the infant tighter as the silhouette of a rider materialized. Fear and hope warred within her out here. Strangers could mean salvation or danger. The horseman approached at an unhurried pace, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats growing louder. Violet could make out a broad-shouldered figure atop a chestnut stallion, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. A cowboy, by the looks of his attire, worn leather chaps, a dust-covered vest, and a revolver holstered at his hip. She stood her ground despite her trembling legs. The baby's cries had subsided to whimpers, as if sensing the approaching presence. The cowboy reined his horse to a stop several paces away, studying her with piercing blue eyes that stood out against his sun-bronzed skin. "Madam," he said simply, tipping his hat. His gaze moved to the bundle in her arms, his expression unreadable beneath the stubble covering his jaw. "Please," Violet found herself saying, her voice barely audible over the wind that swept across the plains. "I need help." The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots raising small clouds of dust as they hit the ground. He approached slowly, as if afraid she might bolt like a startled doe. "Appears that way," he said, his voice deep and tinged with a drawl that suggested he hailed from somewhere far south. "What's a lady like you doing out here with a babe, if you don't mind my asking?" Before Violet could answer, the baby let out another desperate cry. The man's expression softened immediately, and he stepped closer. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the infant. Something in his eyes, a genuine concern that seemed out of place in this harsh land, made Violet nod. She carefully transferred the swaddled infant to his arms. The cowboy handled the baby with surprising gentleness, cradling it with the confidence of someone who'd done so before. He bent down slightly to get a better look at the small face, his stern features melting into something much softer. "This child yours, madam?" he asked, though his eyes never left the baby's face. Violet swallowed hard. "No, his mother. She died in my arms just hours ago. Consumption. She begged me to take him to his father in Pueblo, but the stagecoach left without me when we stopped for water." The words tumbled out, each one releasing a fraction of the burden she'd been carrying. "I don't even know the child's name." The cowboy looked up then, his blue eyes meeting hers. Something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or recognition of the desperation they both saw in each other. "What's your name, madam?" he asked. Violet Morrison." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Morrison. I'm Darius Grayson." He adjusted the baby in his arms, who had quieted at his touch. "This little one needs milk and shelter, and you look like you could use some rest and a decent meal yourself." Violet nodded weakly, suddenly aware of how parched her throat was and how her legs trembled from exhaustion. Darius looked down at the tracks they stood upon, then back at the infant and finally at her. With a decisiveness that seemed characteristic of him, he nodded once. "My ranch is about 3 miles east of here. Not much, but it's got clean water and food." He bent down, still holding the baby, and picked up her small carpet bag with his free hand. "I'll see to it that you both get to Pueblo safely, but first, you need to regain your strength." As Violet hesitated, the baby began to fuss again, tiny fists waving in the air. Darius looked down at the child, then back at her with an expression of such certainty that it momentarily took her breath away. "I know what it's like to be left alone in this world," he said quietly. Then, with a firmness that brooked no argument, he added, "This child needs a mother and a father. You're doing your best for the first part. As for the rest," he looked down at the baby with a solemn expression, "I will be both until we find his real father. That's a promise." Something in the way he said those words, as if making a sacred oath, made Violet believe him completely. With no other options and the sun climbing higher in the merciless sky, she nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson." He helped her mount his horse before climbing up behind her, one arm securely around her waist, the other cradling the infant against his chest. As the horse set off at a gentle pace toward the east, Violet found herself leaning back against the solid warmth of the cowboy's chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat a counterpoint to the hoofbeats below. She did not know this man, this Darius Grayson, but as the plains stretched out before them under the vast Colorado sky, she felt for the first time since being abandoned that perhaps all was not lost. Darius's ranch was modest but well-maintained, nestled in a shallow valley with a small stream running through it. A one-story cabin stood at its center, with a barn and corral off to one side. It was nothing like the grand estates Violet had seen back east, but as they approached, she found herself drawn to its rustic simplicity. "It's not much," Darius said as he helped her down from the horse, the baby still secure in one arm, "but it's home." "It's beautiful," Violet replied honestly, taking in the wildflowers that grew alongside the cabin and the mountains that rose majestically in the distance. Inside, the cabin was spare but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and simple wooden furniture filled the main room. Through an open doorway, Violet glimpsed a bedroom with a neatly made bed. "You'll take my room," Darius said, following her gaze. "I'll sleep out here." Before Violet could protest, he handed her the baby and moved to the kitchen area. He poured water from a pitcher into a cup and brought it to her. "Drink this. Then we need to figure out how to feed this little one." Violet took the water gratefully, drinking deeply. "Do you have a cow for milk?" Darius nodded. "Got to. The milk will need to be watered down for him, though." "Cow's milk is richer than mother's milk." At her surprised look, he added, "I grew up with 4 younger siblings, helped my ma with all of them." There was something in his tone, a slight edge that suggested there was more to that story, but Violet was too exhausted to pursue it. Instead, she watched as he moved efficiently around the small cabin, gathering supplies for the baby. "We can use this as a cradle for now," he said, pulling out a large wooden drawer from a dresser and lining it with a soft blanket. "It's what my ma used for my youngest brother when he was first born." As Violet laid the baby in the makeshift cradle, she realized something. "We don't even know his name." Darius stood beside her, looking down at the infant who had fallen into an exhausted sleep. "No papers with him." "Nothing from his mother," Violet shook her head. "She only had time to tell me to find his father in Pueblo, a man named Thomas Wade. She said he works at the bank there." She hesitated. She said he doesn't know about the baby, they weren't married." "She was on her way to tell him when she fell ill." Darius's expression hardened slightly. "I see." After a moment, he added, "Well, he'll need a name until we find his father. Can't just call him baby all the time." Violet considered this. His mother called him her little Samuel once when she was feverish. Perhaps that was what she intended to name him. "Samuel, then," Darius agreed, his voice softening as he looked at the sleeping infant. "It's a good, strong name." They stood there in silence for a moment, the three of them forming an unlikely tableau in the small cabin. The realization of how strange their situation was suddenly hit Violet, and she felt a bubble of hysterical laughter rising in her throat. Here she was, in the middle of nowhere with a man she'd just met and a baby that wasn't hers, planning what to call him as if they were his parents. As if sensing her thoughts, Darius placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Why don't you rest? I'll see to Samuel when he wakes, get him some milk." The kindness in his voice undid her. Tears that she'd been holding back since the stagecoach left her behind suddenly spilled over. "I'm sorry," she whispered, wiping at her cheeks. "It's just everything has happened so quickly. 3 days ago I was in St. Louis, heading west to take a position as a schoolteacher in Denver. Then the woman with the baby sat next to me and she was coughing so badly, and before I knew it, SHH, Darius said, his hand still on her shoulder. "You don't need to explain anything now. Rest. We'll sort it all out later." Violet nodded, suddenly overwhelmed with fatigue. She allowed Darius to lead her to his bedroom, where she sank gratefully onto the bed. The last thing she remembered before sleep claimed her was the surprising gentleness in the cowboy's calloused hands as he pulled a quilt over her. She awoke to the sound of deep, rumbling laughter and a baby's happy gurgle. For a moment, disoriented by sleep, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back: the dying woman, the baby being left behind, and the cowboy who had rescued them. Violet sat up, brushing her tangled hair from her face. Through the bedroom doorway, she could see Darius sitting at the table, Samuel propped on his lap. He was using a small cloth dipped in milk to feed the baby, who was eagerly sucking on the improvised nipple. "There you go, little man," Darius was saying, his voice gentler than she had heard it before. "You're hungry, aren't you? We'll get you all fixed up before we find your pa." Something about the scene, this rough cowboy tenderly feeding an orphaned infant, brought a lump to Violet's throat. She must have made some sound, because Darius looked up, catching her eye. "Miss Morrison," he said, straightening slightly but maintaining his hold on Samuel. "Hope we didn't wake you. This young fellow was mighty hungry." Violet moved to join them, conscious of her rumpled appearance. "How long was I asleep?" "About 4 hours, Darius replied. "Sun's starting to set. Thought I'd let you sleep through the night, but if you're hungry, I've got some stew on." As if on cue, Violet's stomach rumbled, and she realized she hadn't eaten since early that morning. "That would be wonderful, thank you." Darius nodded toward a pot hanging over the fire. "Help yourself. Bowls are on the shelf there." As Violet served herself, she watched Darius with the baby. For such a large man with hands roughened by ranch work, he handled Samuel with remarkable dexterity. "You're good with him," she observed, sitting across from them at the table. A shadow crossed Darius's face there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Like I said, I helped raise my siblings." He glanced down at Samuel, who had finished feeding and was now contentedly gazing up at him. "Besides, babies are easy. They just want to be fed, clean, and held. It's when they get older and start having opinions that things get complicated." The wry humor in his voice made Violet smile. "I suppose that's true." She took a bite of the stew and made an appreciative noise. "This is delicious." "Don't sound so surprised," Darius said, the corner of his mouth lifting in what was almost a smile. "A man living alone learns to cook, or he starves." "Have you always lived alone?" Violet asked before she could stop herself. It was a forward question, especially to a man she barely knew, but something about Darius Grayson made her curious. He was silent for a moment, and she feared she had overstepped. But then he shifted Samuel to his shoulder, patting the baby's back gently, and answered, "No. Grew up in Texas with my parents and 4 siblings. Pa ran a small cattle operation. When I was 18, the war was just ending. Pa died of a fever that winter, and I took over running things." His voice remained even, matter of fact, but Violet sensed the pain beneath the words. 2 years later, a gang of outlaws raided our ranch, took our cattle, burned our house. My ma and sisters were inside. Violet's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Darius, I'm so sorry." He acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "My brother Daniel and I tracked them for weeks. When we finally caught up to them," he trailed off, his eyes distant. "Let's just say we made sure they'd never hurt another family." Samuel let out a small burp, breaking the tension in the room. Darius looked down at him with a half smile. "Good job, little man," he said softly, then continued his story. Afterward, Daniel headed to California, said he couldn't bear to stay in Texas with all those memories. I drifted for a while, then ended up here 5 years ago. Bought this place with what was left of our family's money and started over. Violet absorbed his story, understanding now the shadows she sometimes saw in his eyes. "And you've been alone all this time?" "Got my horses and cattle for company," he replied with a shrug. "And neighbors about 10 miles that way," he nodded westward. "The Johnsons, good folks. They check in sometimes." Samuel began to fuss, tiny face scrunching up. "Think he needs changing," Darius said, standing up with the baby. "I tore up one of my old shirts for cloths. They're over by the basin." Violet hurried to gather the makeshift diapers. "Let me. You've done more than enough." Their hands brushed as she took Samuel from him, and Violet felt a strange flutter in her chest at the contact. She busied herself with changing the baby, acutely aware of Darius watching her. "What about you, Miss Morrison?" he asked as she worked. "You mentioned being a school teacher." Violet nodded, securing the cloth around Samuel's tiny bottom. "Yes, I taught at a small school in St. Louis for 2 years after finishing my education. But when my parents passed last winter, influenza, there was nothing keeping me there. I answered an advertisement for a teacher in Denver." She smiled ruefully. "Though I suspect they've hired someone else by now, given I was supposed to arrive 3 days ago." "Don't be so sure," Darius said. "Good teachers are hard to come by out here. Once we get Samuel to his father, I could take you on to Denver if you'd like." The offer was kind, but Violet found herself strangely reluctant to think about parting ways. "Thank you, though I should probably send a telegram first to see if the position is still available." Darius nodded. "We can do that from Pueblo. It's about a day's ride from here. We can head out tomorrow if you're rested enough." Samuel, now clean and content, yawned widely, his tiny pink mouth forming a perfect O. Violet cradled him close, inhaling his sweet baby scent. "I should probably feed him once more before we put him down for the night," she said. Darius moved to prepare more milk, his movements efficient. As they worked together to settle Samuel for the night, Violet was struck by how natural it felt, as if they'd been caring for this child together for much longer than a mere day. Once Samuel was asleep in his drawer cradle, Darius built up the fire against the evening chill and brought out a bottle. "Whiskey," he offered. "Medicinal purposes only, of course." Violet hesitated, then nodded. The day had been extraordinary in every way. A small drink seemed appropriate. They sat before the fire, the crackling flames casting a warm glow over the cabin. Darius poured a finger of amber liquid into 2 cups and handed one to her. "To unexpected journeys," he said, raising his cup. "And kind strangers," Violet added, touching her cup to his. The whiskey burned pleasantly going down, warming her from the inside. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the popping of the fire and Samuel's soft breathing. "You know," Darius said eventually, "I meant what I said earlier about being both for him until we find his father." He stared into the fire. No child should be without someone to look after them. Violet studied his profile, strong and steady in the firelight. "It's a noble thing you're doing, Mr. Grayson." He glanced at her, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Darius, please. If we're going to be temporary parents together, we might as well use first names." "Darius," she repeated, liking the way it felt on her tongue. "And you must call me Violet, then." His eyes met hers, and something electric passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of the strange intimacy of their situation. "Violet," he said softly, and her name in his deep voice sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the evening chill. Samuel stirred in his sleep, breaking the moment. Violet set down her cup, suddenly aware of how tired she still was despite her earlier rest. "I should turn in," she said. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Darius nodded, standing to add another log to the fire. "Take my bed again." "I'll be fine out here." As Violet headed toward the bedroom, she paused in the doorway, looking back at the cowboy silhouetted against the flames. "Thank you, Darius. Not just for the shelter and food, but for caring about Samuel, about me. It means more than I can say." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Get some rest, Violet. Dawn comes early on the ranch." As she slipped under the quilt, surrounded by the faint scent of him on the pillows, Violet found herself wondering what might have happened if they had met under different circumstances. With that thought warming her more than the whiskey had, she drifted into a dreamless sleep. The journey to Pueblo began at first light, with Samuel securely bundled and nestled in a sling Darius had fashioned across Violet's chest. They rode double on Darius's stallion, Thunderbolt, with Violet in front and Darius's solid presence at her back. His arms encircled her as he held the reins, creating a protective barrier that made her feel safer than she had in months. "The trail follows the creek for about 5 miles, Darius explained as they set out, his breath warm against her ear. "Then we'll hit the main road to Pueblo. If we make good time, we should be there by late afternoon." The day was clear and mild, the landscape gradually transforming from the grassy plains of Darius's ranch to more varied terrain. They passed small homesteads and larger ranches, occasionally exchanging waves with distant figures working the land. Around midday, they stopped in a grove of cottonwoods by a small stream to rest and feed Samuel. Violet sat on a fallen log, nursing the baby with the cloth-dipped milk while Darius tended to Thunderbolt and unpacked a simple lunch of jerky, biscuits, and dried apples. "He's taking to it well," Darius commented, settling beside her and nodding toward Samuel, who was eagerly sucking on the milk-soaked cloth. "He's a good baby," Violet agreed, smiling down at the infant. In just one day she had grown impossibly attached to him, his tiny fingers and rosebud mouth captivating her heart. "It will be difficult giving him to his father." Darius was silent for a moment, watching the baby with an unreadable expression. "I've been thinking about that," he said finally. "This Thomas Wade, we know nothing about him except he works at a bank. We don't know what kind of man he is, if he's fit to raise a child." Violet looked up at him, surprised by the protectiveness in his voice. His mother seemed to think he would care for him. "Maybe," Darius conceded. But she also didn't tell him she was carrying his child. Must have had her reasons for that. It was a point Violet hadn't considered. "What are you suggesting?" Darius ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a sign of him working through a problem. "I'm just saying we should be cautious. Learn what we can about him before handing Samuel over. He met her eyes. A baby isn't a package to be delivered. We have a responsibility to make sure he's going to a good home. The seriousness with which he took this temporary guardianship touched something deep in Violet. "You're right," she said softly. "We'll be careful." They finished their meal and continued on their journey, the conversation turning to lighter topics as they rode. Darius told her about his ranch, his plans to expand his cattle herd, and his hopes to breed horses one day. Violet shared stories of her teaching days, the antics of her students, and her love of literature. "My mother used to read to us every night," she reminisced. Shakespeare, Dickens, the Brontes. She believed a good book could transport you anywhere in the world. "My education was more practical," Darius admitted. "Reading, writing, ciphering enough to run a ranch and not get cheated in business. But I always envied those who could lose themselves in books." "It's never too late to start," Violet said. "I could lend you some of my favorites once I'm settled in Denver." The mention of their eventual parting cast a shadow over the conversation. They rode in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. As promised, they reached Pueblo by late afternoon. The town was larger than Violet had expected, with a main street lined with businesses, a courthouse at one end, and residential streets branching off in a grid pattern. Coal mining and steel production had brought prosperity to the area, evident in the substantial brick buildings and busy streets. "We should find a place to stay first," Darius suggested as they entered the town. "Then tomorrow we can locate the bank and this Thomas Wade." Violet agreed, suddenly nervous about what the next day would bring. She held Samuel closer, protective of the tiny being who had so quickly become precious to her. The Golden Prairie Hotel was modest but clean, situated near the center of town. Darius secured 2 adjoining rooms, explaining to the curious desk clerk that they were bringing the baby to his father after the tragic death of his mother. The half-truth earned them sympathetic nods and an offer of extra blankets for the baby. Once settled in her room, with Samuel asleep in yet another makeshift cradle this time, a dresser drawer lined with hotel linens, Violet sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the past few days. A soft knock at the connecting door roused her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Darius entered, hat in hand, looking somewhat out of place in the dainty hotel room. "I thought you might be hungry. There's a restaurant downstairs that the clerk recommended." Violet glanced at Samuel. "I don't want to leave him alone." "We can ask if they'll send something up," Darius suggested, "or I could bring something back for you." "Would you mind terribly bringing something? I'm quite tired from the journey." "Not at all," he assured her. "Any preferences?" She shook her head. "Anything will be fine, thank you." After Darius left, Violet moved to the window, gazing out at the streets of Pueblo as they transitioned from day to evening. Lamps were being lit along the main street, and workers were heading home or to saloons for their evening entertainment. Somewhere in this town was a man who had no idea that his life was about to change irrevocably. Thomas Wade, banker, soon to be father to an infant he'd never known existed. Would he welcome Samuel with open arms, resent the responsibility thrust upon him, deny paternity altogether? The uncertainty of it all weighed heavily on her. In the short time since Samuel had come into her life, she had begun to love him as if he were her own. The thought of leaving him with a stranger, even his biological father, filled her with a deep, aching sadness. When Darius returned with a tray of food, roast beef, potatoes, green beans, and fresh bread, Violet was still standing by the window, lost in thought. "Penny for your thoughts," he said quietly, setting the tray on a small table by the window. "I was just wondering about tomorrow," she admitted. "About Thomas Wade?" Darius nodded, understanding in his eyes. I know, I've been thinking about it too. He pulled out a chair for her. Come, eat something. We'll need our strength for whatever tomorrow brings. They ate together in companionable silence, the simple meal tasting better than Violet had expected. As they finished, Samuel began to stir, making the small mewling sounds that preceded his more insistent cries for food. I'll get his milk ready, Darius said, rising. The hotel kitchen provided some fresh cow's milk when I explained our situation. As he prepared the baby's meal, Violet lifted Samuel from his makeshift bed, soothing him with gentle words and touches. By the time Darius returned with the milk, Samuel was fully awake and hungry. They worked together to feed him, their hands occasionally brushing, each contact sending a small thrill through Violet. When Samuel had been fed, changed, and settled back to sleep, they found themselves standing close together beside his cradle, watching his peaceful slumber. He looks like an angel when he sleeps, Violet whispered. He does, Darius agreed, his voice equally soft. It's hard to believe he's only been in our lives for 2 days. I know, Violet said, turning to look up at him. It feels like we've been caring for him together for much longer. Their eyes met in the dim lamplight, and Violet was struck by the tenderness in Darius's gaze. For a moment, it seemed as if he might say something more, might even reach for her. But then he stepped back, clearing his throat slightly. We should both get some rest, he said. Tomorrow will be a big day. Violet nodded, trying to ignore the disappointment that flickered through her. Yes, of course. Good night, Darius. Good night, Violet, he replied, his voice gentle. He hesitated for a moment longer, then retreated to his own room, closing the connecting door softly behind him. Alone again, Violet prepared for bed, her mind filled with thoughts of the cowboy in the next room and the uncertain future that awaited them all. Morning came with a soft golden light filtering through the curtains, and the sounds of Pueblo awakening for the day. Violet had slept fitfully, her dreams a confused jumble of stage coaches, crying babies, and Darius's blue eyes looking at her with an intensity that left her breathless even upon waking. Samuel had been remarkably good, waking only twice during the night for feeding. Now he lay awake in his drawer cradle, gazing up at the ceiling with the solemn curiosity of infants everywhere. A knock at the connecting door announced Darius, already dressed for the day in clean, if somewhat worn, clothes, his hair damp from washing. Morning, he said, his deep voice carrying a note of tension that hadn't been there the night before. How'd you sleep? Well enough, Violet replied, conscious of her own disheveled appearance. Samuel was quite good. Darius nodded, coming to look down at the baby who gurgled at the sight of him. A smile softened the cowboy's features as he reached down to let Samuel grasp his finger. I asked about the bank, he said, his eyes still on the baby. It's just down the street, opens at 9. I thought we might get some breakfast, then head over there. Violet nodded, a knot forming in her stomach at the thought of what lay ahead. I'll need a few minutes to get ready. Take your time, Darius said. I'll see about getting some milk for Samuel. Alone again, Violet dressed in her second-best dress, the only other one she had, as her trunk had continued on with the stage coach. She did her best with her hair, pinning it up in a simple but respectable style, and washed her face in the basin of water provided by the hotel. By the time Darius returned, she had fed and changed Samuel and was packing the few baby things they had accumulated into a small bundle. You look nice, Darius said, his compliment awkward but sincere. Thank you, Violet replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. Shall we go? The hotel's dining room was nearly empty at this early hour, just a few business travelers reading newspapers over coffee and eggs. They ate quickly, neither of them having much appetite for the hearty breakfast set before them. Samuel, fed and content, slept peacefully in Violet's arms. All too soon, they found themselves standing outside the Pueblo National Bank, a solid brick building with large windows and imposing columns at its entrance. "Ready?" Darius asked, his hand coming to rest briefly on her shoulder. Violet took a deep breath and nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." Inside, the bank was cool and quiet, the high ceiling and marble floors creating an atmosphere of solidity and permanence. A young clerk looked up as they entered, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of them: a rugged cowboy, a modestly dressed young woman, and a baby clearly not the bank's usual customers. "May I help you?" he asked, straightening his spectacles. "We're looking for Thomas Wade," Darius said, his voice carrying more authority than Violet had heard before. "Mr. Wade is the assistant manager," the clerk replied, his tone respectful but cautious. "May I ask what this is regarding?" Darius glanced at Violet, then back at the clerk. "It's a personal matter, family business." The clerk hesitated, then nodded. "One moment, please." As he disappeared through a door at the back of the room, Violet shifted Samuel in her arms, suddenly afraid of what was to come. Darius moved closer to her, his solid presence a comfort. "It'll be all right," he murmured, though she could hear the uncertainty in his voice. The clerk returned, followed by a man in his mid-30s, well dressed in a dark suit with a gold watch chain across his vest. He was handsome in a conventional way, with sandy hair neatly parted and trimmed, and a clean-shaven face that spoke of careful grooming. "I'm Thomas Wade," he said, his tone professional but curious. "How may I assist you today?" Darius stepped forward slightly, positioning himself subtly between Violet with the baby and the banker. "Mr. Wade, my name is Darius Grayson. This is Miss Violet Morrison. We've come about a matter of some delicacy." Thomas Wade's expression remained polite but guarded. "I see. Perhaps we should speak in my office." He led them to a small but well-appointed room at the rear of the bank, closing the door behind them. 2 chairs faced a substantial desk, behind which Wade took his seat, gesturing for them to sit. "Now, what is this about?" he asked, his gaze moving between them before settling on the bundle in Violet's arms. Violet looked at Darius, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, she began. "Mr. Wade, 3 days ago, I was traveling by stagecoach from St. Louis to Denver. A woman named Elizabeth Collins sat beside me. She was very ill consumption and had with her an infant, barely a month old." Violet swallowed hard, remembering the woman's desperate eyes. "When it became clear she was dying, she begged me to bring her baby to its father in Pueblo." "To you, Mr. Wade." The color drained from Thomas Wade's face. "Elizabeth," he whispered, his professional demeanor crumbling. "She's dead." Violet nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry. She passed away in my arms. Her last words were about making sure her son reached you safely." Thomas Wade sat back in his chair, visibly shaken. "Her son," he repeated. My son." "That's what she claimed," Darius said, his voice neutral. "Said you didn't know about him." Wade's eyes moved to the bundle in Violet's arms, wide with disbelief. May I see him?" Violet hesitated only a moment before standing and carefully placing Samuel in the banker's arms. Thomas Wade accepted the baby with trembling hands, pulling back the blanket to reveal Samuel's face. The resemblance, now that they were side by side, was unmistakable: the same straight nose, the same slight cleft in the chin. "He looks like my father," Wade said hoarsely, a complex mix of emotions playing across his face: shock, grief, wonder. What is his name?" "Samuel," Violet said softly. "At least, that's what we've been calling him. His mother referred to him as her little Samuel when she was feverish." Wade nodded slowly, still staring at the baby's face. Samuel was my father's name, he said, almost to himself. Then, looking up with damp eyes, Elizabeth and we were engaged last summer. But her father disapproved of me, thought banking wasn't a respectable enough profession for his daughter. He sent her back east to live with relatives. I wrote to her, but my letters were returned unopened. I thought. His voice broke. I thought she had chosen to obey her father's wishes. Violet and Darius exchanged glances, both surprised by this turn of events. She never mentioned being engaged, Violet said gently. Only that you were the baby's father and that she was coming to tell you about him. She must have discovered she was expecting after she left, Wade reasoned, his fingers gently tracing Samuel's cheek, and decided to come back despite her father's objections. The baby stirred in his arms, tiny fists waving. Wade looked up at them with a dazed expression. I don't know anything about caring for a baby, he admitted, a note of panic entering his voice. It's not so hard, Darius said, his tone gentler than before. Mostly they just need feeding, cleaning, and holding. And love, Violet added softly. They need to know they're loved. Wade looked down at his son again, and something seemed to settle in his face, a determination, a recognition of duty. Yes, he said. Love, I can do that. He met Violet's eyes. Miss Morrison, I cannot thank you enough for what you've done, bringing Samuel to me, caring for him on the journey. You must have suffered great inconvenience. It was no inconvenience, Violet assured him, though her throat tightened at the thought of parting from the infant she had come to love. Samuel is a precious child. We have been honored to care for him. We brought some supplies for him, Darius added. Not much, but enough to get you started. And I'm sure the ladies of the town will be happy to advise you on what else you'll need. Wade nodded, clearly still overwhelmed. Yes, of course, I'll need to make arrangements. A nursemaid, perhaps, or... He trailed off, then shook his head as if to clear it. I'm sorry, this is all very sudden. We understand, Violet said. It was sudden for us as well. Where are you staying? Wade asked. I'd like to properly thank you. And perhaps you could tell me more about Elizabeth, about her final days, and show me how you've been caring for Samuel. We're at the Golden Prairie Hotel, Darius answered. But we won't be staying long. Miss Morrison is due in Denver to take up a teaching position. Wade's expression brightened slightly. A teacher? We're in need of a teacher here in Pueblo, actually. Our schoolmistress is retiring at the end of this term. Violet blinked in surprise. Here in Pueblo? Yes, Wade confirmed. The school board has been searching for a replacement. I'm on the board myself. It would be a comfort to know that someone who cared for my son, even briefly, was nearby. If you're interested, of course. The offer was unexpected, and Violet found herself momentarily speechless. She glanced at Darius, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. I would need to think about it, she said finally. I had my heart set on Denver, but... Of course, Wade said quickly. It was just a thought. Will you join me for dinner this evening, both of you? At my home. We can discuss it further and you can show me how to care for Samuel. Darius and Violet exchanged another glance, silently communicating. After a moment, Darius nodded slightly. We'd be honored, Violet said, turning back to Wade. What time shall we come? As they left the bank, Samuel remaining with his father, Violet felt a strange mixture of relief and loss. She had fulfilled her promise to Elizabeth Collins, delivering her son safely to his father. Yet the absence of the baby's weight in her arms left her feeling oddly bereft. You're quiet, Darius observed as they walked back toward the hotel. Just thinking, Violet replied. About Samuel, about Wade's offer. Pueblo's not Denver, Darius said neutrally, but it's a good town, growing, and you'd be able to see Samuel, watch him grow up. Violet looked up at him, trying to read his expression. Yes, that's true. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been forming in her mind. How far is Pueblo from your ranch? A slight smile tugged at the corner of Darius's mouth. About a day's ride, not so far. Not so far, Violet repeated softly, a small hope blossoming in her chest. And you'd visit, when you come to town for supplies. Darius stopped walking, turning to face her fully. His blue eyes were serious as they met hers. Violet, he said, her name a caress in his deep voice. I'd find reasons to come to town a lot more often than just for supplies. The promise in his words made her heart flutter. Before she could respond, he continued. I know we've only known each other for a few days, and I know it's been unusual circumstances. But there's something here, between us. I felt it from the moment I saw you standing on those tracks with Samuel in your arms. Violet nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt it too. Darius reached out, hesitantly at first, then with more certainty, taking her hand in his. I'm not asking for any promises now. Just consider staying in Pueblo. Give us a chance to see what this might become without the pressure of caring for a baby that isn't ours. His honesty, his directness, was refreshing. Violet found herself squeezing his hand. I will. Consider it, I mean. The dinner at Thomas Wade's home that evening was a subdued affair, dominated by practical discussions about Samuel's care and reminiscences about Elizabeth Collins. Wade lived in a handsome two-story house at the respectable end of town, clearly furnished with a bachelor's sensibilities, but comfortable nonetheless. He had already hired a mature woman from the neighborhood to help with the baby, a widow named Mrs. Donnelly, who had raised 6 children of her own. As the evening drew to a close, Wade brought up the teaching position again. I've spoken with the chairman of the school board, he told Violet. He's very interested in meeting you. The position would be available immediately if you want it. The current teacher, Mrs. Holloway, has been eager to retire for some time but stayed on until a replacement could be found. Violet glanced at Darius, who was watching her with that same steady gaze that made her feel both seen and protected. I would like to meet with the school board, she said, making her decision. If the position is suitable, I would be honored to accept it. The smile that broke across Darius's face was like the sun emerging from behind clouds, warm, bright, and full of promise. The next week passed in a whirlwind of activity. Violet met with the Pueblo School Board and was offered the teaching position on the spot, impressed as they were by her credentials and demeanor. Thomas Wade, grateful beyond words for her role in bringing Samuel to him, offered her the use of a small cottage on his property that had originally been built for a gardener. It was modest but charming, with 2 rooms and a small garden, and best of all, it was rent-free. Consider it part of your compensation as a teacher, Wade insisted when she tried to decline. The town's salary for teachers isn't generous, and good accommodations are hard to find. Besides, you'll be close enough to help with Samuel occasionally if you're willing. Violet accepted with gratitude, touched by his generosity and pleased by the prospect of remaining part of Samuel's life, if only peripherally, throughout it all. Darius remained in Pueblo, ostensibly to help her settle in, but increasingly, because neither of them seemed willing to part company. He rode out to his ranch once to check on things, and returned with a small wagon carrying her trunk, which he had tracked down and retrieved from the stagecoach company in Denver. On her first official day as Pueblo's new schoolteacher, Darius arrived at her cottage just as she was preparing to leave for the schoolhouse. He stood on her small porch, hat in hand, looking unusually nervous. I thought I might walk you to school, he said, for your first day. Violet smiled, charmed by his thoughtfulness. I would like that very much. They walked side by side down Pueblo's main street, drawing curious glances from townsfolk who were already buzzing with gossip about the new teacher and her cowboy friend. Violet, in her most professional dress with her hair neatly pinned, felt a surge of pride as Darius walked beside her, tall and strong in his clean, if worn, clothes. At the schoolhouse steps, he stopped, turning to face her. "I'll be waiting here when school lets out," he said simply. The promise in those words, not just for today, but for many days to come, made Violet's heart swell. On impulse, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed a quick, soft kiss to his cheek. "I'll look forward to it," she whispered, then hurried inside before her courage failed her. The day passed in a blur of new faces and names as Violet met her pupils, 28 children ranging in age from 6 to 16. They were curious about her, this newcomer from the East, but respectful, and by the end of the day, she felt a growing confidence in her new role. True to his word, Darius was waiting on the schoolhouse steps when the final bell rang. He walked her home, carrying her books and listening attentively as she told him about her day. At her cottage door, he hesitated. "Violet," he said, his voice serious, "there's something I've been meaning to ask you." Her heart quickened. "Yes. Would you do me the honor of accompanying me to the Founders' Day dance this Saturday? It's a big event in town, from what I hear." It wasn't what she had expected or perhaps secretly hoped for, but the invitation pleased her nonetheless. "I would love to, Darius." His smile was worth any disappointment she might have felt at the simplicity of the request. "I'll come for you at 7 then." As promised, Darius arrived promptly at 7 on Saturday evening, dressed in what were clearly his best clothes: a clean white shirt, a new vest, and trousers that still held their crease. His boots were polished to a shine, and his hair was neatly combed, though a few stubborn strands had already broken free to curl over his forehead. Violet had spent the afternoon preparing, wearing her one good dress, a deep blue that complemented her eyes, and arranging her hair in a more elaborate style than her usual teaching knot. The look on Darius's face when she opened the door told her the effort had been worthwhile. "You look beautiful," he said simply, his eyes warm with admiration. "Thank you," she replied, a blush rising to her cheeks. "You look very handsome yourself." The dance was held in the town hall, a large room transformed for the occasion with bunting, lanterns, and flowers. A small band played at one end, and tables laden with food and drink lined the walls. It seemed all of Pueblo had turned out for the event, from the wealthiest merchants to the humblest workers. Thomas Wade was there, looking more rested than when they had last seen him. He greeted them warmly, introducing Violet to various members of the community as the remarkable young woman who brought my son safely to me. Samuel, he informed them, was at home under the watchful eye of Mrs. Donnelly. "You must come by tomorrow for Sunday dinner," Wade insisted. "Samuel has grown so much in just a week, you'll hardly recognize him." As the evening progressed, Violet found herself swept into the community's embrace. The mothers of her pupils sought her out to express their satisfaction with the new teacher, and the town's matrons made her feel welcome with invitations to teas and sewing circles. Through it all, Darius remained at her side, a steady presence that both grounded and exhilarated her. When the band struck up a waltz, Darius turned to her with a half-smile. "May I have this dance, Miss Morrison?" Violet placed her hand in his with a smile of her own. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Grayson." Darius led her onto the dance floor with a confidence that surprised her. For a man who had spent most of his adult life on a ranch, he moved with unexpected grace. His hand at her waist was firm but gentle, his other hand holding hers with care. "I didn't know you could dance," Violet said as they moved together in perfect time to the music. My mother insisted all her children learn, Darius replied, the memory bringing a soft smile to his face. Said it was an essential social skill, even for ranch folk. She was a wise woman, Violet murmured, allowing herself to move closer within the circle of his arms. She would have liked you, Darius said, his voice low and intimate despite the crowded dance floor. She always said I needed someone with spirit and intelligence to keep me on my toes. The implication that his mother would have approved of her as more than a dance partner sent a thrill through Violet. As they continued to waltz, the room seemed to fade around them, until it felt as if they were the only two people in the world. When the music ended, Darius did not immediately release her. Instead, he gazed down at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Violet," he said softly, "I need to tell you something. Would you walk outside with me for a moment?" Heart racing, Violet nodded. Darius led her through the crowd and out onto the town hall's wide veranda, where the cool evening air was a welcome relief from the warmth of the dance floor. Stars dusted the sky above, and the sounds of music and laughter filtered out from the hall behind them. They stood at the railing, looking out over Pueblo's main street, now quiet in the evening hour. Darius seemed to be gathering his thoughts, his profile strong and handsome in the soft light spilling from the hall's windows. "When I found you on those tracks with Samuel," he began, his voice deep and steady, "I thought I was just doing what any decent man would do, helping someone in need. But from that first moment, there was something more, something I couldn't explain." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "These past days, getting to know you, watching how you care for others, how you throw yourself into your teaching, it's only confirmed what I think I knew from the start." Violet's heart hammered in her chest as she waited for him to continue. "I know it's fast," Darius said, a touch of uncertainty entering his voice for the first time. "Some might say too fast, but out here, life doesn't always give you the luxury of time. When you find something precious, you have to be brave enough to reach for it." He took a deep breath. "What I'm trying to say in my clumsy way is that I've fallen in love with you, Violet Morrison. I know we've only known each other a short while, but I know what I feel. And if you could see your way to giving me a chance, to letting me court you properly, it would make me the happiest man in Colorado Territory." Violet stood perfectly still, overwhelmed by the emotion in his words and the answering surge in her own heart. "Darius," she whispered, "I've fallen in love with you too. It happened so quickly I could hardly believe it myself." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise over the plains, warm, brilliant, full of promise. He raised one hand to gently cup her cheek. "May I kiss you, Violet?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that she felt as much as heard. In answer, she rose on her tiptoes, closing the distance between them. His lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepened as his arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. Violet wound her arms around his neck, giving herself over to the sweet sensation of his mouth on hers, the solid warmth of his body against her own. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Darius rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the moment you kissed my cheek on the schoolhouse steps," he admitted with a soft laugh. "I've been wanting you to," Violet confessed, her fingers playing with the hair at the nape of his neck. "Since long before that, if I'm being honest." He kissed her again, briefly but tenderly. "We should probably go back inside before we're missed," he said reluctantly. "Though all I want to do is stay here with you under these stars." Violet nodded, equally reluctant to break the spell of the moment. But as they turned to re-enter the hall, hands linked, she felt a profound sense of rightness. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Violet's life. By day, She threw herself into her teaching, finding joy and purpose in guiding her pupils' education. In the evenings, Darius would often call on her, sometimes bringing small gifts, wildflowers, a book he thought she might enjoy, fresh eggs from his ranch hens. On weekends, they would visit Thomas Wade and little Samuel, who was growing plump and happy under the combined care of his father and Mrs. Donnelly. Their courtship, while swift by Eastern standards, was conducted with a propriety that even the most conservative members of Pueblo society could approve of. Darius attended church with her on Sundays, sitting beside her in the pew with his hat on his knee and his Bible open before him. They took walks along the river, dined together at the hotel restaurant, and on warm evenings sat on her cottage porch, talking long into the night. As spring turned to summer, Violet's cottage garden bloomed under her care, a riot of colors and scents that transformed the once plain dwelling into a charming home. Darius built her a small fence and gate, and together they planted vegetables that would supplement her meals in the coming months. It was on such an evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, that Darius turned to her with a serious expression. "I've been thinking about the future," he said, taking her hand in his. "My future. Our future, if you'll have me." Violet's heart quickened. "I'm listening. My ranch is doing well, the cattle are thriving, and I've started breeding horses as I always wanted to, but it's a lonely place for one man." He met her eyes, his own blue ones earnest and vulnerable. "It needs a woman's touch. It needs children's laughter. It needs a family." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I rode all the way to Denver to get this," he said, a touch of nervousness in his voice as he opened it to reveal a simple but beautiful ring, a small diamond flanked by tiny sapphires. "Violet Morrison, will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Of making a home with me, raising a family with me, growing old with me?" Tears of joy sprang to Violet's eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Darius Grayson, I will marry you." His face lit up with a joy that matched her own as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, catching the last rays of the setting sun and sending prisms of light dancing across the porch. He pulled her into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership. When they told Thomas Wade of their engagement the following day, he was genuinely delighted for them. Samuel, now nearly 4 months old and beginning to show a personality as sunny as his smile, seemed to sense the happy occasion, gurgling and reaching for Violet when she held him. "You must let me host the wedding," Wade insisted. "It's the least I can do for the two people who brought my son safely to me." Violet and Darius exchanged glances, then nodded their agreement. "That's very generous of you," Darius said. "We were thinking of a simple ceremony, nothing elaborate." Of course," Wade assured them. "Whatever you wish. But it should be a proper celebration. The whole town will want to wish you well." And so it was that on a perfect September day, with the aspens beginning to turn gold in the mountains and the air crisp with the promise of autumn, Violet Morrison and Darius Grayson were married in the Pueblo church, with little Samuel Wade serving as an honorary ring-bearer, carried down the aisle in his proud father's arms. The bride wore a gown of ivory satin, simple but elegant, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had been a gift from the ladies of the town, who had taken their new teacher into their hearts. The groom, standing tall and proud at the altar, wore a new suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, his normally unruly hair tamed for the occasion. As they exchanged their vows, promises to love and cherish each other for all their days, Violet thought of the strange twist of fate that had brought them together: a dying woman, an orphaned baby, a chance encounter on a lonely stretch of railroad track. Out of tragedy had come this beautiful new beginning, this love that felt both miraculous and completely right. The reception that followed, held in the garden of the Wade house, was indeed the celebration Thomas had promised. It seemed all of Pueblo had turned out to wish the new couple well, from Violet's pupils and their families to Darius's neighboring ranchers. There was music and dancing, a feast that showcased the best of local produce, and a wedding cake that Mrs. Donnelly had labored over for 3 days. As evening fell and lanterns were lit throughout the garden, casting a golden glow over the festivities, Darius led his bride onto the makeshift dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. "Happy, Mrs. Grayson," he murmured as they moved together to the gentle strains of the fiddle. "Completely," Violet replied, smiling up at him. "And you, Mr. Grayson?" "More than I ever thought possible," he said, his arms tightening around her waist. "Do you know what today is?" Violet looked at him quizzically. "Our wedding day." Darius smiled, the special smile that was reserved for her alone. "Yes, but it's also exactly 6 months since I found you on those railroad tracks. 6 months since I looked down at you and Samuel and knew my life was about to change forever." 6 months, Violet marveled. "It feels like forever and no time at all." "That's love for you," Darius said, his voice deep with emotion. "Changes your whole sense of time and place, makes everything before seem like just preparation for the real thing." As they danced beneath the stars, surrounded by well-wishers and friends, Violet knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was meant to be, in this man's arms, in this town, with these people. Her journey west had taken an unexpected turn, but it had led her exactly where she belonged. The months that followed were a time of adjustment and joy as Violet adapted to life as a rancher's wife. She had completed the school term in Pueblo, training her replacement, a young woman from Denver who had the same passion for education that Violet herself possessed. It was with mixed emotions that she had said goodbye to her pupils, but the promise of her new life with Darius beckoned irresistibly. Their ranch, which Darius had named Thunderbolt after his faithful stallion, was indeed modest as he had first described it, but to Violet it was perfect. The cabin had been expanded in the weeks leading up to their wedding, with Darius adding a proper bedroom and enlarging the kitchen area. The result was a comfortable home that combined his practical sensibilities with her touches of beauty and comfort. Life on the ranch had a rhythm all its own up before dawn to tend to the animals, days filled with hard work under the vast Colorado sky, evenings spent in contented companionship by the fire. Violet learned to make soap and candles, to preserve fruits and vegetables for the winter, to ride horseback across the rolling plains with the same confidence she had once navigated the crowded streets of St. Louis. Darius, for his part, seemed to thrive with her by his side. The solitary, sometimes somber cowboy she had first met was still there, but he smiled more easily now, laughed more freely. He taught her about cattle and horses with the same patience she had once shown her pupils, and listened attentively when she read aloud from her favorite books in the evening. They visited Pueblo regularly, partly to sell cattle and buy supplies, but mostly to see little Samuel, who was growing into a sturdy, happy child under the loving care of his father and Mrs. Donnelly. Thomas Wade had become a dear friend to them both, always welcoming them into his home as if they were family. It was during one such visit, as they sat in Wade's parlor watching Samuel take his first tentative steps across the carpet, that Violet felt a familiar wave of nausea wash over her. She had been experiencing similar episodes for several weeks, but had attributed them to the change in diet and the physical demands of ranch life. Now, catching Darius's concerned glance, she wondered if there might be another explanation. Later that night, as they prepared for bed in their room at the Golden Prairie Hotel, Violet decided to share her suspicions. "Darius," she began, sitting on the edge of the bed and watching as he removed his boots, "I think I might be with child." His head jerked up, his eyes wide with surprise and hope. "Truly?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Violet nodded, a mixture of excitement and nervousness fluttering in her stomach. "I'm not certain, but all the signs are there. The sickness in the morning, the tiredness, certain." Changes. In an instant, Darius was beside her on the bed, his strong hands cradling her face with infinite tenderness. "A baby," he breathed, awe and joy transforming his features. "Our baby." "You're happy then?" Violet asked, though his reaction had already answered her question. "Happy," Darius repeated, a laugh of pure delight escaping him. "Violet, my love, happy doesn't begin to describe it. I'm overjoyed, ecstatic, terrified." He pressed his forehead to hers. "We're going to be parents." The words sent a thrill through Violet. Parents. They, who had once cared for an orphaned infant together, would now have a child of their own. A child born of their love, a new life to nurture and guide. "I love you, Darius Grayson," she whispered, tears of happiness blurring her vision. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love another person." "And I love you, Violet Grayson," he replied, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "You and our child with all that I am." The following day they sought confirmation from Dr. Reynolds, Pueblo's physician, who pronounced Violet approximately 3 months along and in excellent health. The baby would arrive in early spring, he informed them, just as the world was coming back to life after the winter's sleep. As they rode back to the ranch, Violet seated before Darius on Thunderbolt as had become their custom, his protective arm around her waist. They made plans for the future: a cradle to build, a nursery to prepare, names to consider. The land around them, golden in the autumn sunlight, seemed to reflect their happiness, as if nature itself was celebrating their joy. Winter came early that year, bringing snow that transformed the landscape into a glittering wonderland. The ranch was isolated for weeks at a time, but Violet found she didn't mind. Their cabin was warm and snug, with a well-stocked pantry and a library of books that Darius had surprised her with for Christmas, a collection he had been quietly accumulating on his trips to Denver and Pueblo. As the snow fell outside and the baby grew within her, Violet felt a contentment she had never known before. In the evenings, Darius would place his hand on her expanding belly, marveling at the occasional flutter of movement, his expression one of wonder and devotion. "What are you hoping for?" Violet asked him one night as they lay in bed, the wind whistling around the eaves of the cabin. "A boy or a girl?" Darius considered the question seriously, his hand resting protectively over her rounded abdomen. "Honestly, I don't care as long as you're both healthy, but—" He hesitated, a sheepish smile playing on his lips. "I've been picturing a little girl, with your eyes and spirit." Violet smiled, placing her hand over his. "I've been imagining a boy, strong and kind like his father." "Either way," Darius said, pressing a kiss to her temple, "this child is already loved beyond measure." The winter months passed slowly, each day bringing them closer to spring and the arrival of their child. Darius worked tirelessly, ensuring the ranch was prosperous and secure, while also taking on more of the household tasks as Violet's pregnancy advanced. He built a beautiful cradle from pine wood, carving intricate designs of wildflowers and horses along its sides, and fashioned a rocking chair that fit Violet's petite frame perfectly. As February turned to March, and the first signs of spring began to appear, Violet's time drew near. Darius insisted they move temporarily to Pueblo to be closer to Dr. Reynolds, renting a small house not far from the Wade residence. Thomas Wade, delighted by their news and honored when they asked him to be the baby's godfather, visited often, bringing little Samuel, now walking steadily and beginning to form simple words. It was on a perfect spring morning, with the air fragrant with the scent of new growth and birdsong filling the trees, that Violet's labor began. Darius sent for Dr. Reynolds and Mrs. Donnelly, who had experience as a midwife, then settled in for the long vigil. The labor was difficult, lasting through the day and into the night. Darius paced outside the bedroom, his face drawn with worry as Violet's cries reached him through the closed door. Thomas Wade arrived to keep him company, offering quiet support and reassurance based on his own experience awaiting Samuel's birth. Finally, as dawn was breaking over Pueblo, a new cry joined the morning chorus, the lusty wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Darius froze in his pacing, his heart pounding as he stared at the bedroom door, waiting. After what seemed an eternity, Mrs. Donnelly emerged, her face tired but wreathed in smiles. "Mr. Grayson," she said, "you have a son, a strong, healthy boy, and your wife is doing well." Darius's knees nearly buckled with relief and joy. "A son," he repeated, the words barely audible. "And Violet, she's truly well. See for yourself," Mrs. Donnelly said, opening the door wider and gesturing for him to enter. Inside, the room was warm and dim, with the curtains drawn against the morning light. Dr. Reynolds was packing his bag, nodding to Darius with a satisfied smile as he passed. And there on the bed, looking exhausted but radiant, was Violet, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Darius," she said softly as he approached, her voice filled with wonder and love, "come meet your son." He moved to her side as if in a dream, sinking onto the edge of the bed and gazing down at the tiny face nestled against Violet's breast. The baby's eyes were closed, his small features scrunched in sleep, a dusting of dark hair, Darius's hair covering his perfect head. "He's magnificent," Darius breathed, reaching out a tentative finger to touch his son's cheek. "You're magnificent. I love you both so much." Violet's smile was tired but triumphant. "We did it," she whispered. "We made this perfect little person." "What shall we call him?" Darius asked, unable to tear his gaze away from his son's face. They had discussed names during the long winter evenings, but had never quite settled on one. "I was thinking," Violet said hesitantly, "perhaps we could name him after your brother, Daniel." Darius looked up at her, deeply moved by the suggestion. "Daniel," he repeated, testing the name. "Daniel Grayson." He nodded slowly, emotion making his voice rough. "It's perfect. Daniel it is." As if in approval, the baby opened his eyes for the first time, revealing irises of deepest blue, his father's eyes in miniature. "Hello, Daniel," Darius said softly, gently taking his son into his arms with a confidence born of those days caring for Samuel. "Welcome to the world, little man. Your mama and I have been waiting for you." The years that followed were filled with the joys and challenges of raising a family on the frontier. Daniel grew into a strong, curious boy, with his father's steady nature and his mother's love of learning. By the time he was 3, Violet was teaching him his letters at the kitchen table, while Darius was already showing him how to sit a horse. The ranch prospered under their joint care, expanding to include more cattle and a growing herd of horses that were becoming known throughout the territory for their quality and training. Darius built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, though they kept the original cabin as a guest house for visitors. And visitors they had aplenty. Thomas Wade and Samuel, now a handsome boy of 7 with his father's business acumen and a gentle nature all his own, were frequent guests. Samuel and Daniel had formed a bond that was almost brotherly, despite the age difference, and Wade's visits were always occasions for celebration. One summer evening, as they sat on the porch of their new home watching Daniel and Samuel play with the ranch dogs in the yard, Violet leaned against Darius's shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her. "What are you thinking about, love?" Darius asked, his arm around her shoulders, his fingers playing with a strand of her hair that had escaped its pins. "Just how fortunate we are," Violet replied, her gaze moving from the boys to the vast expanse of their ranch, golden in the setting sun. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is our life, that all of this came from that chance meeting on the railroad tracks." Darius pressed a kiss to her temple. "Not chance," he said firmly. "Fate, providence, whatever you want to call it, we were meant to find each other that day." Violet smiled, turning to look up at him. The years had added a few lines to his face, a touch of silver at his temples, but his blue eyes were as warm and steady as the day she had first met him. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her stomach, still flat beneath her cotton dress. "We're going to need another bedroom in that house of yours." Darius's eyes widened, then crinkled with joy. "Another baby, truly." Violet nodded, laughing as he pulled her into a careful embrace. "Dr. Reynolds confirmed it yesterday when I was in town, due in winter this time." "Daniel will be thrilled to be a big brother," Darius said, his face alight with happiness. "And well, I'm the luckiest man alive." As if on cue, Daniel came running up to them, his small face flushed with excitement. "Papa, Mama, look what Samuel taught me." He proceeded to demonstrate a somewhat wobbly cartwheel, tumbling into the grass with a giggle. "Well done, son," Darius called, clapping his hands. He leaned closer to Violet, whispering, "I hope it's a girl this time, a little beauty like her mama." Violet squeezed his hand. "Boy or girl, this child will be loved just like Daniel, just like we love each other." They shared a brief, sweet kiss before Daniel demanded their attention again, eager to show off more of his newfound skills. As the sun set over the Colorado plains, casting long shadows across the land they had made their own, Violet felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought them here, a journey that had begun with a desperate promise to a dying woman and a cowboy's simple, life-changing declaration: "I will be both." That promise, made out of compassion for a motherless infant, had led to this, a love that had transformed both their lives. A family forged not just by blood but by choice and devotion, and a home built on the foundation of their shared dreams. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky and Darius called the boys in for supper, Violet offered up a silent prayer of thanks for the twists of fate that had led her to this moment. This man, this life that was richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined when she first set out from St. Louis all those years ago. In the end, she reflected, following her family into the warm, lamp-lit house, it wasn't the grand adventures or dramatic moments that made a life worth living, though they had certainly had their share of both. It was this, the quiet, everyday love of a man and a woman who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. Something that would endure, like the mountains on the horizon, steady and true through all the seasons of their lives.